Welcome to Politics Chat, in which I try to answer your questions about modern politics. I'm going to jump into things now, and I'm as you know, often I sort of focus on one thing. There's a lot going on, so I'm going to try and answer your questions, and they will therefore mean that we have little snippets of things. So if people are coming in late, with luck, you won't feel like you missed too much, and then we will be able to wrap it all up at the end. So you asked for me to start with the arrest this morning of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. And yes, that was really a surprise. If you opened up your phone in bed as I do and saw that first thing, you thought, whoa, because there is, I think, a growing sense around the globe that the Epstein files are about far more than the sexual assault of children. Although in a way that's everything, right? That is the fundamental basis on which the whole concept of exerting power over other people led for these depraved people who sexually assaulted children. But it is increasingly appearing, and by the way, I'm going to hedge this my words really carefully here, because as I've said to you before, the Epstein files are raw intelligence, so you cannot take everything that's in them at face value, but you also can't dismiss everything that's in them. And I am not in a position to be able to make good decisions about what is real in there and what is not, simply because I don't have access to the files. And as I think I've said to you before, when you look at files and when you're able to cross check them, you can have a pretty good sense of what's viable and what's not. But I don't have that here. So I'm going to have to wait before I say anything definitive to say, these things have to be vetted. Although emails that are in the files, certainly a lot of them seem to be legitimate. They're not all apparently legitimate, but a number of them are legitimate. So like I say, I'm going to hedge what I say very carefully. But the more we learn about the politicians and the businessmen, business people, and academics around the globe, and also intelligence services that had ties to Jeffrey Epstein, the more it looks as if this is indeed a vast criminal enterprise, as a member of Congress recently described it. And as that becomes clear, that's going to cause ripples everywhere. And by ripples, I mean in governments, and I mean in financial circles and in academic circles and in intelligence circles, because it seems to be clear that this man and his associates, and I'm going to leave that open because in a criminal enterprise, there are almost always other people involved, were very well connected and have had an outsized influence on global affairs now for at least 20 years. And just as an example of what I'm talking about, I'm going to suggest you look, for example, at Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon was instrumental in getting Trump elected in 2016. He has been all over this concept of virtual politics, in which people who were trying to sway political events in certain countries flooded the zone with disinformation. He was very much part of that. And it turns out he was a close associate of Jeffrey Epstein, and they were working together on many things. So you're going to see more and more of this. But one of the reasons, there are two reasons really, that the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor was a bellwether of what might be coming. The first is that he is a senior member of the royalty, of the British royalty. And there has not been a senior member of the British royalty arrested since 1647, during the English Civil War, when people loyal to Parliament arrested the king, King Charles I. And So that right there says members, and you knew, by the way, that the UK was taking the involvement of um, this man in Epstein's circles very, very seriously because, among other things, last October they stripped him of his royal titles, and they don't strip the royals of their titles on a frequent basis by any stretch of the imagination. So you knew that they were taking it seriously. But this was again sort of historical that they arrested a senior member of the royal family. Um, Again, hadn't been done since 1647. Um, there is also significant in that arrest the fact that they did not arrest him for the accusations that have been made against him for sexual assault. They arrested him for misusing his position in the government by allegedly or by apparently providing private government, I'm sorry, non-public government information to Epstein while he was representing the UK as a trade envoy. So he's basically giving him inside information from the government. And just think of what that looks like and what that means to have the idea that trade information that was not supposed to be public was going to Epstein. What was he doing with that? And again, one of the things to be watching with Epstein and the stuff around Epstein is that one of the currencies that group of people used was information that other people did not have. And they use that information to garner extraordinary wealth and power and to exercise that power over our globe's most vulnerable people. But that exchange of information is obviously enormously valuable. And this is unlikely to be the last person who gets swept up in that kind of the repercussions of the Epstein case. But we're not even where I am most interested in terms of the global impact yet, and that's financing. And I did that interview the other day with Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, and talking about the fact the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, is sitting on information about how Epstein used the banking system. So his bank accounts, who's putting money into them, who's taking money out of them. And Bessent is guarding that like, a dragon on his hoard of gold. So Wyden has been using every tool he can to try and shake that loose, because I think once we start getting into the financing, then it's going to be even more extraordinary. So that was the first thing that happened that I saw this morning anyway. But then the other thing that happened is that in South Korea, the former president of South Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol, has been sentenced to life in prison. He's a 65-year-old man. He's been sentenced to life in prison after his attempt in December of 2024 to sort of do a self-coup. He was the president, but his popularity had slipped dramatically, and he wanted to cement his power by taking over the courts and the legislature in South Korea. You may or may not remember it. It was just an absolutely fascinating night. I still remember I was actually in a restaurant in Washington, D.C., and when the news broke, and you might want to look at my you can search my old letters. You might want to look back at that, because it happened quite late at night. So many people in South Korea went to bed, and then the president declared martial law, and he sent troops out to stand around the National Assembly building so that the lawmakers couldn't get inside to stop him. And there were just astonishing video of like the lawmakers climbing in windows to get in there, and they managed to vote against the imposition of martial law within a matter of, I think it was 3 hours. By the next morning, he had lifted the martial law. But what that meant is that many people in South Korea went to bed that night. This whole thing happened, and they woke up the next morning and it was over. But it happened that there was a U.S. journalist there for another reason, who happened to be where all this was taking place. And she kept a running feed of what was going on. And it was just absolutely fascinating. And again, that has played out today in that, first of all, the assembly went on and impeached Yoon and arrested not only him but a number of people who were part of his coup, and a number of them, 5 of them now, have been sentenced to quite long prison sentences. But this morning, he was sentenced to life in prison. The prosecutors had asked for a death sentence, but they gave him life in prison because they said, well, he didn't tell the the military to kill protesters, which he could have, and so they gave him, between his age and that, they only gave him life in prison. But those two things, I think, were really interesting to start the day because then you turn to the United States. Now, remember, in the US, theoretically, the law is king, right? Thomas Paine, we have no king. If we have to have a king, the law is king, and nobody is above the law. But the radical right, embodied as it is now by the Republican Party, has been working for a long time now to create what they call the unitary executive. And that idea of the unitary executive used to be very much a fringe theory, but the idea behind it is that because there are 3 branches of government, and they are all supposed to be independent, that nobody can check the head of the executive branch. And this really started to become more mainstream in the Republican Party during the 1980s when members of excuse me, Reagan's administration recognized that the American people did not like what the Reagan administration was doing. And so they wanted to find a way to put in place, as Reagan's Attorney General Edwin Meese said, to put in place a system whereby it didn't matter what the voters did. They were going to be able to keep Reagan's policies in place no matter what. So they start to talk about ways to make the president more powerful. And, one of the ones that is proposed, actually by Samuel Alito, who was working at the time, he's now a Supreme Court justice, who was working at the time in the Department of Justice, was the idea of signing statements, for example. The idea that a president could simply say when he signed a measure that he was only going to do certain parts of it, that he was going to interpret it however he wanted. And they knew at the time that Congress would be incensed over that. So they began to work it into our system in bills that nobody paid any attention to. And it sort of sprang to everybody's attention during the George W. Bush administration when you may or may not remember, but that was shortly after Abu Ghraib, we discovered that the United States and its partners were engaging in torture. And John McCain, a Republican of Arizona, just went ballistic over that because he had been tortured during the Vietnam War. And he's like, we are not going to do this, and this is not going to happen. So Congress, in an appropriations bill, said, no torture. And George W. Bush, in a signing statement, said, I will do whatever it takes to, and this is not a direct quote, but I'm going to do whatever I think is necessary to protect the American people, essentially saying, I don't care what Congress says, I'm going to torture people, or I'm going to have people tortured. That concentration of power in the president has been, in defiance of what the American people want and even what Congress wants, has been growing in the Republican Party until, with the court case, the Supreme Court case of Donald J. Trump versus United States of July 2024, the Supreme Court said that a president cannot be prosecuted for crimes committed as part of his official duties, and that there is in the Department of Justice an understanding, it's based on a memo, by the way, it's not a law, it's not a court decision, that a president will not be prosecuted while in office because that's a waste of their time, theoretically. Although Trump, by the way, has been thrown around lawsuits like, Pez there in the White House. So apparently he has time for his own lawsuits. He just can't answer the lawsuits. But with that decision, the Donald J. Trump versus US decision, the Supreme Court was actually, I think, doing something a little bit different than simply concentrating power on the president. They were ultimately saying that we, the Supreme Court, get to decide what is and is not a presidential duty that is okay. People kept saying, why doesn't Joe Biden just take that out for a spin? And he did, in fact, over things like the excusing of educational debt. And they said, no, you can't do that. That's not part of your official duties. So it was pretty clear that the Supreme Court was taking to itself what was a presidential duty, that it was going to be able to decide that. Nonetheless, where it has left us, and they also said then and later on in a couple of decisions that the president has to be given great leeway in terms of the way he handles foreign affairs. So Trump has been doing all kinds of wackadoodle stuff and saying, "Hey, I'm just engaging in foreign affairs. This is just national security." So where we are as of this morning is the country from which the United States of America broke in 1776 to avoid tyranny and establish the rule of law as the basis of our government is requiring less accountability from its president than the UK is demanding from a royal related to the king. And that's a real eye-opener right there. We know from Jamie Raskin, a representative from Maryland, that Trump is cited in the Epstein files that have been released. Remember, no more than about 50% of them have been released, and there are rumors now that it's actually much, much lower than that. But in what's been released, he appears more than a million times. And yet, he is not answering for that. And similarly, the former president of South Korea, who did try to do exactly what Trump tried to do, or very similar to what Trump tried to do on January 6th, 2021, is now in prison for life. And similarly, of course, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil is in prison for his attempt at a coup. And the United States so far has not done anything to Donald Trump. And that's something that we are going to have to grapple with, where our failures were and why we are continuing to fail on that front. But if that's the way we started, today was also, or where we are right now, is also very odd for the rest of the day and what Trump has done. So Trump had his first meeting today of his so-called Board of Peace. Now, if you remember one of the last few days in which I talked to you, I talked about how after World War II, the US and its allies and partners embraced the idea that you could prevent a further world war by working across the globe to secure representative democracy, to have free trade or relatively free trade, and to have a number of international organizations that kind of normalized getting along with each other, so that people went to each other's countries and there were students who went back and forth, and you read about each other in each other's papers, and so you created this web. Well, Trump has been actively working to destroy this, and pretty clearly his Board o' Peace, is designed to replace the UN, the United Nations. He's made that very clear. So it had its first meeting today, and honestly, you could probably write an entire book around this first meeting, because it was held at the U.S. Institute of Peace, which was an independent organization created by Congress in 1984. And if you remember, early on in Trump's term, people from his administration just went and seized the building and basically fired everybody who was in it. So now they have renamed it. And again, none of these renamings are official yet, and there are lawsuits over all of them. But they have renamed it the Donald J. Trump Institute of Peace. And this is where they held which it's quite close to the White House, by the way, in Washington, D.C. So this is where they held this Board of Peace meeting. Now, who's on this Board of Peace? If you remember, they released a document that was supposed to organize the Board of Peace, and it basically said that Lots of people, lots of different countries could be part of it. But if you wanted to be a permanent member, you had to kick in $1 billion. And Trump has basically all power. He gets to say yes or no to all decisions, and he gets to expend all the money. And it honestly, to me, it looked like almost a way to make him forget about being president. So now he could really be, the grand poobah of the entire globe, and maybe they could push him out of the presidency because he's really erratic. And that showed today in a really big way. Currently, 27 countries have agreed to be part of the Board of Peace, although as far as we know, they haven't ponied up any cash, because you can come even if you don't put up the $1 billion, but you won't become a permanent member. And Trump gets to decide who represents you after you're for you know if you're not going to be a permanent member. So the people who have said they want to be part of this are countries who are themselves accused of human rights violations, like El Salvador, Belarus. They're those tier of countries, those people who are either rising authoritarians, or they are desperate to get along with Trump because they depend on US business. They depend on having a good relationship with the US economy. So you have those 27 people. Well, the majority of our former friends and allies have said we're not doing this. So the list of countries that have said no, outright said no, are, well, first we got to move Canada out, because Trump yanked Canada's invitation after the leader of Canada, Mark Carney, insulted his foreign policy at Davos a month or so ago. Austria, France, Germany, Greece, Ireland, Italy, New Zealand, Norway, Poland, Slovenia, Sweden, the United Kingdom, Ukraine, and the Vatican have said they will not be part of Trump's Board of Peace because they support the United Nations. They don't trust the way this organization is put together. And they are concerned about the fact that who he's trying to pull together. So what happened today was, through my mind are running the words bonkers and wackadoodle. But where I'm really going with this is, I think we saw a demonstration of a rising dictator who has lost it. I mean, so Trump left these people waiting on stage while they were listening to his playlist of music. And then he got up and just sort of free associated and said, just watch it. I mean, he just said just crazy stuff. And then he announced that the US is putting $10 billion into the Board of Peace. Well, he has no authority to do that. Congress is the only body of our government that can appropriate money. And here's a news flash: the revenue measures all have to start in the House of Representatives. So that's something people tend to forget. And someday maybe I'll give you a whole thing on taxes, because the way that the government is set up to handle revenue measures is actually really quite interesting. But he just sort of said, we're going to do this. And it was, in my notes, because I was writing about this today, in my notes, what I really wrote was the Trump show. That's what it felt like. It was just the Trump show. At the same time, there was something else that came in the news today that you probably didn't see. It was an exclusive out of the Washington Post, including from a man who has just left the Washington Post, a great journalist, Jacob Bogage, in which they identified, these two journalists, Bogage and Lena Sun, identified that the White House, along with the Department of Health and Human Services, which is the one run by Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has also looked quite erratic lately, is proposing, and I'm sorry, I know I sound incredulous, but I really am incredulous, is proposing a new organization for the United States that essentially replicates the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization that we just pulled out of because Trump's, had all these political reasons he was mad at it. He didn't like the way they handled COVID-19 and so on. But they're talking about recreating a version of the WHO under Robert Kennedy that is US based and that will cost us $2 billion annually, compared to the money that we used to put in the WHO, the World Health Organization, which was 680 million. And experts are looking at this and saying, wait a minute, we got so much bang for our buck at $680 million that you're now asking us to recreate this for $2 billion a year, and it's not going to be nearly as good. And again, I think what you're seeing here, I'm trying to look at the big picture here. I think what you're seeing here is this idea of America first is really Trump first. Trump's people first, he wants to get rid of the trade and the international organizations that actually make people's lives better and are less expensive than trying to go it alone. Because if you bring it home and you put up walls, then it's possible to get rid of oversight and to put a lot of that money in your own pocket, is my guess. Is what's really going on here. Paul Krugman had a great segment on Kennedy and the extraordinary value in the extraordinary grift in the alternative treatments that people like Kennedy support. That's not really my lane, but there's just no other reason that you can look at getting rid of the UN and getting rid of the WHO and then saying, oh, we're just going to recreate them here in the US. Give me billions of dollars, without seeing that this is, yet another way to fleece the people in the United States of America. On that front, I'm going to jump a little bit here because I'm not quite done with Trump. But I do want to call your attention to an interview that I did this morning with Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota, because there's something else happening right now that has really flown under the radar screen. And I'm not going to write about it in my letters tonight, but I am going to write about it before the weekend, probably tomorrow night, unless something dire happens between now and then. If not, then Saturday night. And that is that the Republicans under Donald Trump are trying to use a law in the US to just basically turn over our wilderness lands to developers, miners, real estate development, and so on. And that is the issue. The reason it's in the news right now, and you may not be seeing it, is seeing it because there's so much else going on. I think what you're seeing right now is Trump really hammering Minnesota, really trying to hurt Minnesota, because Minnesota is a Democratic state in the midst of a whole bunch of Republican states. And he keeps insisting he won it 3 times. He did not. He lost it by a lot 3 times. And it has a very high rate of voting as well. And he's trying to get the voting records and all that. But the Boundary Waters canoe area, which sounds less impressive than that actual extraordinary protected land is, currently is protected from mining. And there has been an attempt for years now for a Chilean company to come in and mine at the headwaters of the Boundary Waters canoe area, which also includes Canada, by the way, although it has a different name there. And Congress under Trump, and of course, Congress in both chambers is controlled by Republicans, is trying to use something called the Congressional Review Act to strip away the regulations over public lands going way back. Now, in the past, the Congressional Review Act was designed only to enable Congress to look back for about 60 days. So if the president put a new kind of regulation on something, the Congress had about 2 months to say, nah, we don't want to do that. But this Congress is using it to go way back, to go back many years, and they are expanding it beyond regulations into other kinds of orders as well. And the trick to this is that because of the way the CRA, as it's known, is written, a simple majority vote in both chambers makes that regulation moot. So they're trying to do that. It's already the CRA for the boundary waters has already passed the House of Representatives, and it's supposed to come up before the Senate next week. I thought there was actually a date scheduled. The senator says she doesn't think there is, but and she would know. But this is very serious, because if they do this through the CRA to the boundary waters, um, canoe area, um, they can go after any of the public lands in any state. And they've been very clear. The Trump administration has been very clear that they intend to do this. And while this is an issue for conservation because of pollution, of course, especially for the boundary waters, one of the things that really jumps out to me is that outdoor recreation is an enormously big business in the United States, but it's mom and pop organizations. The people who run the hunting trips, and the people who run the canoeing trips, and the backpacking trips, and the restaurants that support those people, and the small stores, and all of those things really help to reinforce democracy, because it's a much, it's people have enough to eat, and they are independent thinkers, and small businesses are actually what drive this country, not the big ones we pay so much attention to. And if you turn over our wilderness areas to these giant corporations, a very, very few people get extraordinarily wealthy. And we lose access to those wilderness areas. And that's hiking, and that's camping, and that's fishing, and that's hunting, and that's photography, and that's, all the things that you do in those wilderness areas. But you're also going to lose all those businesses. So if you think, for example, if you live near a resort area, and I always think of, if you're outside of Zion National Park, um, people go out there for the national park, and you all should. It's a spectacular national park. But if you take away that national park, those towns are going to die. I mean, it's not a place that you would end up otherwise. So that is true across this country for wilderness areas. And I really want to call that out, because I feel like people don't know it's happening. And please do, if you're interested in this. I'm thrilled to say that I've been able to do these interviews with a lot of people, and I would like to do more, but of course I'm pretty busy writing the letters and all that. But they've been really spectacular, because I do insist on prepping ahead of them, both for them and for me. And they come prepared really to explain to you what they care about and why, and what you can do about it. And Senator Smith was no exception. She was really terrific on this. And I made her promise to come back, because the reason that I reached out to her is I wanted to talk about agriculture, which is something else we're not talking about. And she's on the Agriculture Committee in the Senate. And if you ever want to play Richardson trivia, I have admitted this before to my friend Joanne Freeman. My favorite committee in Congress is the Agriculture Committee, and nobody pays any attention to it, but it's actually really cool, as are the ag journals. So she's going to come back and talk about that, but please do look at that. So let me go back to the other material. If that was this morning with Trump on the Board of Peace, where he fell asleep, by the way, and this weird thing with the WHO, that's not all that Trump did today. It is alarming that he has caused a giant, weirdly, I just picked up the language there of the Declaration of Independence. I did not intend to do that. But he has caused to have erected on the Department of Justice his own portrait, a giant portrait of himself. Now, he tested that out earlier this year on the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It didn't get a lot of attention, but he put a giant picture of himself up there. I think he also showed up on another building as well. It might have been Commerce. I could be wrong about that, but he was on USDA. Now he has put his own image on the Department of Justice, pretty clearly announcing to us all that he is in charge of the laws in this country from now on. This is 100% dictator material. And he also today put two new people on the Fine Arts Commission that was supposed to be in charge of, not be in charge, one of the people, one of the organizations in charge of approving his grand ballroom now, which completely dwarfs the original White House. Two new people went on this morning, including his 26-year-old former executive assistant. I'm not former, executive assistant who does not have any experience in fine arts. And they are now, everybody on that commission, a Trump appointee, and they approved his plans for the ballroom. Now, that is in a lawsuit, and there is also somebody else who has to sign off on it. But there too, what you're essentially seeing, I think, is a president who is obviously making dictatorial moves, but is also completely out of touch with reality. The guy has lost it. And we're watching this. I'm sitting here watching this and being like, I can't believe that the Republicans are sitting and letting this happen. That being said, another thing, and the reason I started late today, although obviously I screwed up so much of the technology, it went even later. There is a buildup of U.S. forces around Iran, quite serious forces. Now, if you remember, Trump insists that he got rid of Iran's capability for enriching uranium back when he hit those underground facilities with the bunker buster bombs there. But now, of course, he insists that they have to stop the program that he says he already stopped. We don't know what he's going to do with regard to Iran, but there was just as of this afternoon late, story out of the Wall Street Journal that he is thinking about a limited strike to force Iran to stop its enrichment, which is, of course, ongoing. And if they refuse, then he will go after Iran fully. Now, there's a lot of things wrong with this. One of the things that is hugely problematic is Trump is making these decisions without Congress, and Trump is bonkers. And in addition to those things, and those right there are non-starters, I would like to point out to you that something that is increasingly concerning to me, and that is that he's just putting all this on our tab. The tax cuts that he's given to the wealthy and corporations are sending our deficits and therefore our debt. Remember, deficit is the difference in what we take in and put out in a year, and the debt is the accumulation of those deficits. These things are going through the roof. We are spending money like nobody's business, and we're not getting anything for it. That is, when Biden and even Trump during COVID was putting things on our tab, we were getting education or new roads or new hospitals, or we were investing in the U.S. This is simply we're having things go bang to make Trump feel good, and I am really concerned about that and about the what that's doing to our finances, which I've written about quite recently. They're problematic to the point that the Wall Street Journal is talking about higher taxes. And by the way, just so you know, the U.S. has the money to take care of all these things, but the way our tax structure has been since the first set of the George W. Bush tax cuts, we have moved from being in the black to being deeply in the red. We could fix that, but there has to be political will to do it. So this is what we're watching right now. And we're also watching all of this taking place as Trump is increasingly under pressure from the Epstein files. As you know, the New Mexico has put together a commission now and is now reopening an investigation of Epstein's Zorro Ranch. So he's under pressure there. He came out this afternoon and said that it was a real shame that they had arrested the guy in the UK, but that he Donald Trump had been exonerated, which is just, I mean, that's child thinking. I didn't take that cookie. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And now we all know I didn't do it. When you're sitting there covered with crumbs, right? he's got that pressing down. He's got the extraordinary unpopularity of the federal agents from ICE and Border Patrol, that is causing his popularity to plummet to the point that, of course, they have said they're pulling troops out of Minnesota. And in fact, it appears what they have, not troops, I'm sorry, federal agents out of Minnesota. And what it appears that they have done is not actually pulling people out of cities, or rather pulling people out of cities, but putting them into the suburbs and in more rural areas. So you're seeing more rural arrests everywhere, including close by me here in Maine. So I think they're trying to make it look like they're not doing what they are continuing to do. People are really unhappy about that, and at the same time, you've got this midterm election coming up. So today has been just this really weird day where you're watching other countries deal with an unstable leader or a leader implicated in crimes, while we, on the other hand, are watching our president kind of go rogue and you know be behaving in such a way that the history books will call out today as a day that really stands out. And then this afternoon, he went to Georgia for what was supposed to be a speech on the economy, and that went just as well as you can imagine. So it's been an odd day. And I think that I got to almost everything that you asked about. I was trying, it's kind of a game for me to see if I can put it into a story, the questions that you ask. But let me end with yet one more question. Somebody asked if resistance to Adolf Hitler looked like resistance to Trump. And I am an Americanist for the millionth time. I do know about some of the facts around Hitler and other people as well. But I am trained as an Americanist. And what that means is that while I know historical theories, general historical theories, literally my doctorate, my master's degree, and my undergraduate degree, that's actually in history, but they're in my master's is in literature and art in the United States of America. Like, you take me to Italy, I'm lost unless I read a book. But by God, I can do American stuff. History, same thing. I know American history really, really well. But off this continent, I'm flying, like everybody else is. That being said, if you look at Hitler's rise, there are many parallels there to what I see in the rise in the late 19th century of the reactionary movement in the American South. And in both of them, I think, but my ground is much more secure in the American South. No, there was a majority of people who did not like what was happening, because it's not just about race in the South. It's also about it's about class, and it's about who's getting all the money. But what they didn't have in the South, and also I believe in Germany, but I'm outside my ken there, is the ability to communicate with each other and to say, "Hey, we got trouble over here. Please come help me," and to be able to say, "Hey, we're all in this together." In the American South after the Civil War, the newspapers and the means of communication were overwhelmingly controlled by former Confederates. So the stories that came out, the information that came out, was all incredibly skewed. There would be a riot where a whole bunch of white guys would kill a whole bunch of black guys, and it would show up in the paper as Black People Riot. And when the KKK visited people, they did it in the dead of night, and nobody had a telephone. We don't get telephones in the White House until 1876. So, and it certainly wasn't going to be in the American South. I mean, when I was growing up, we didn't have phones around here. So in the 1960s, not everybody had that. So we have now this ability to create pushback that in that era, individuals did not have, small groups did not have. And that really matters, especially in a country this big, because as people communicate about things like the Congressional Review Act, or that ICE is showing up in, a small town in Maine, or any of the kind of things that normally would have flown under the radar screen, we get to hear about. And that really, really matters. So in this moment, again, speaking up is huge. and speaking up again, the senator today said, please do call every senator. And it was really interesting because I asked which one specifically, and she said, we're not allowed to tell you to call other senators, but think about who might be interested. And I'm thinking, okay, what she's basically saying to us is call any senator who's vulnerable, right? Susan Collins in Maine, light up her phones, right? And anybody who's trying to get reelected in 26 in the Senate, is vulnerable on this particular issue, because we know Americans don't want to turn over our lands to a few international companies, right? This is a Chilean mine for the Boundary Waters, mining companies. So speaking up definitely matters, and showing up for your neighbors. I said that thing about the torches yesterday or Tuesday, and I still love that. I think that's really important. But I also really want to call your attention to what's happening and what the trend seems to be in the United States. So, okay, so you got the halftime show, the Bad Bunny halftime show, and people reacting to that. You've got James Tallarico getting such incredible publicity for what happened on Colbert when the FCC tried to make that not be aired. And I do want to do a little bit of a shout out there. I am a huge supporter of Tallarico. You know, I had him early on in interviews and so on. But it does seem to me unfair that he's getting the kind of publicity he is getting because of this, when Jasmine Crockett is also a terrific candidate. They're just very different. We need them both in our system, but they can't both be senators, the same senator from Texas. So if you're from Texas, you make your own decision. Don't let Brendan Carr or Stephen Colbert make that decision. They're both very strong candidates in very different ways. And those of us who don't live in Texas, you know, I just feel like you should stay out of, personally, I think you should stay out of elections that aren't your state. That's me. But you're seeing this change. But have you looked at the fact that after Bruce Springsteen released that song, whatever, I don't remember the name of it, from Minneapolis, now he's announced he's doing a tour. He's going to be doing an anti-ICE tour. Springsteen is going back on the road to do this. And today, U2 released a song. And that change in popular culture reflects a movement. It doesn't just reflect people trying to make money or whatever. I promise you, Springsteen and U2 don't need any more money. It is showing a movement. These guys don't need to come out of retirement, and they haven't come out of retirement for other stuff, but they are getting on board a movement to defend American democracy. And I do want just to call out the fact that, you know who started that? You did. I absolutely love this. This is a popular movement. This is a grassroots movement. This is, you know, Alex Preddy and Renee Good, but it's also all those people who showed up in their on those incredibly cold days in Minneapolis, and who, you know, are buying out restaurants so that workers don't have to be unsafe around federal agents. This is truly an American movement. And I got to tell you, you know, when I watched the rise, not just of Trump, I mean, it was back George W. Bush, I was like, oh crap, we're in trouble. It really felt like people like me were, you know, crying in the wilderness, right? And I think probably it felt that way to a lot of you too, when I said things like, you know, go arrange flowers or go stand on a bridge. But all those little things have added up, and they've made a difference, and they are continuing to make a difference, and more people are getting involved. And if you need to take a break, by God, do it, you know, because we'll be here, and other people will be here too, helping to move the cause forward. But as I tell you to call and to pick up your torch and to do all of those things, do kind of take a deep breath and realize that when you have people like Senator John Ossoff of Georgia giving that amazing speech last week that I haven't written about yet, but I will, or um, Governor J.B. Pritzker of Chicago talking about principles and love and building a system that gives us better housing and education and health care, um, that you did that. That's because these elected people are listening to you, and the musicians who are supporting this cause are listening to you, and the artists who are making great art, and the people who are paying for billboards to put Epstein files with Donald Trump's face on it, they're listening to you. And that, on the days when you have a hard time getting up and picking up your torch again, maybe that'll help. So thank you for everything you're doing, and I'll keep doing my part. Thank you for being here, and keep the faith. If you'd like to tune in live, I record these chats on Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Maine time on both my YouTube channel and my Facebook page. If you want to hear more from me, I write Letters from an American every night. It's available on Substack and on Facebook, and the audio version of the nightly letter is available the following day wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, on Saturday mornings, I talk with Dr. Joanne Freeman, the historian of the early republic, professor, and dear friend, about history and politics. We call our talks What the Heck Just Happened, and you can find them on YouTube. Politics Chat is produced by Lauren Westfall, music by Andrea von Kampen.